Introduction. Why I love the circus. I love the circus. I love to watch a juggler throwing screaming chainsaws in the air, or a tightrope walker performing 10 flips in a row. I love the spectacle and the sense of amazement and delight at witnessing the seemingly impossible. When I was a child, my dream was to become a circus artist. My parents' dream, though, was for me to get the good education they never had. So I ended up studying medicine. One afternoon at medical school, in an otherwise dry lecture about the way the throat worked, our professor explained, if something is stuck, the passage can be straightened by pushing the chin bone forward. To illustrate, he showed an x-ray of a sword swallower in action. I had a flash of inspiration. My dream was not over. A few weeks earlier, when studying reflexes, I had discovered that of all my classmates, I could push my fingers furthest down my throat without gagging. At that time, I had not been too proud. I didn't think it was an important skill. But now I understood its value, and instantly my childhood dream sprang back to life. I decided to become a sword swallower. My initial attempts were encouraging. I didn't own a sword, so used a fishing rod instead. But no matter how many times I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and tried, I'd get as far as an inch and it would get stuck. Eventually, for a second time, I gave up on my dream. 3 years later, I was a trainee doctor on a real medical ward. One of my first patients was an old man with a persistent cough. I would always ask what my patients did for a living, in case it was relevant, and it turned out he used to swallow swords. Imagine my surprise when this patient turned out to be the very same sword swallower from the x-ray. And imagine this when I told him all about my attempts with the fishing rod. Young doctor, he said, don't you know the throat is flat? You can only slide flat things down there. That is why we use a sword. That night, after work, I found a soup ladle with a straight flat handle and immediately resumed my practice. Soon, I could slide the handle all the way down my throat. I was excited, but being a soup ladle shaft swallower was not my dream. The next day, I put an ad in the local paper, and soon I had acquired what I needed, a Swedish Army bayonet from 1809. As I successfully slid it down my throat, I felt down deeply proud of my achievement and smoked that I had found such a great way to recycle weapons. Sword swallowing has always shown that the seemingly impossible can be possible and inspire humans to think beyond the obvious. Occasionally, I demonstrate this ancient Indian art at the end of one of my lectures on global development. I step up onto a table and rip off my professional checked shirts to reveal a black vest top decorated with a gold sequin lightning bolt. I call for complete silence, and to the thrilling beats of a snare drum, I slowly slide down the army bayonets down my throat. I stretch out my arms. The audience goes wild. And test yourself. This book is about the world and how to understand it. So why start with a circus? And why would I end the lecture by showing off in a sparkly top? I'll soon explain, but first, I would like you to test your knowledge about the world. Please find a piece of paper and a pencil and answer the 13 fact questions below. Number 1. In all low-income countries across the world today, how many girls finish primary school? Number 2. Where does the majority of the world population live? Number 3. In the last 20 years, The proportion of the world population living in extreme poverty has. Number 4. What is the life expectancy of the world today? Number 5. There are 2 billion children in the world today aged 0 to 15 years old. How many children will there be in the year 2100 according to the United Nations? The UN predicts that by 2100, the world population will have increased by another 4 billion people. What is the main reason? How did the number of deaths per year from natural disasters change over the last 100 years? There are roughly 7 billion people in the world today. Which map shows best where they live? Where they live. How many of the world's 1-year-old children today have been vaccinated against some disease? Worldwide, 30-year-old men have spent 10 years in school, on average. How many years have women of the same age spent in school? In 1996, tigers, giant pandas, and black rhinos were all listed as endangered. How many of these 3 species are more critically endangered today? Number 12. How many people in the world have some access to electricity? Number 13. Global climate experts believe that over the next 100 years, the average temperature will. Scientists, chimpanzees, and you. So, how did you do? Did you get a lot wrong? Did you feel like you were doing a lot of guessing? If so, let me say 2 things to comfort you. First, when you have finished this book, you will do much better. Not because I will have made you sit down and memorize a string of global statistics. I am a global health professor, but I'm not crazy. You will do better because I'll have shared with you a set of simple thinking tools. These will help you get the big picture right and improve your sense of how the world works without you having to learn all the details. And second, if you did badly on this test, you are in very good company. Over the past decades, I have posed hundreds of questions like these about poverty and wealth, population growth, births, deaths, education, health, gender, violence, energy, and the environment. Basic global patterns and trends to thousands of people across the world. The tests are not complicated and there are no trick questions. I am careful only to use facts that are well documented and not disputed. Yet, most people do extremely badly. Question 3, for example, is about the trend in extreme poverty. Over the past 20 years, the proportion of the global population living in extreme poverty has halved. This is absolutely revolutionary. I consider it to be the most important change that has happened in the world in my lifetime. It is also a pretty basic fact to know about life on Earth, but people do not know it. On average, only 7%, less than 1 in 10. Get this right. Yes, I have been talking a lot about the decline of global poverty in the Swedish media. The Democrats and Republicans in the United States often claim that their opponents don't know the facts. If they measure their own knowledge instead of pointing at each other, maybe everyone could become more humble. When we polled in the United States, only 5% picked the right answer. The other 95%, regardless of their voting preference, believed either that the extreme poverty rate had not changed over the last 20 years, or worse, that it had actually doubled, which is literally the opposite of what has actually happened. Let's take another example. Question 9, about vaccination. Almost all children are vaccinated in the world today. This is amazing. It means that almost all human beings alive today have some access to basic modern health care. But most people do not know this. On average, just 13% of people get the answer right. 86% of people get the final question about climate change right. In all the rich countries where we have tested public knowledge in online polls, most people know that climate experts are predicting warmer weather. In just a few decades, scientific findings have gone from the lab to the public. That is a big public awareness success story. Climate change apart, though, it is the same story of massive ignorance, by which I do not mean stupidity or anything intentional, but simply the lack of correct knowledge for all 12 of the other questions. In 2017, we asked nearly 12,000 people in 14 countries to answer our questions. They scored an average just 2 correct answers out of the first 12. No one got full marks, and just one person in Sweden got 11 out of 12. A stunning 15% scored 0. Perhaps you think that better educated people would do better, or people who are more interested in the issues. I certainly thought that once, but I was wrong. I have tested audiences from all around the world and from all walks of life: medical students, teachers, university lecturers, eminent scientists, investment bankers, executives in the multinational companies, journalists, activists, and even senior political decision makers. These are highly educated people who take an interest in the world, but most of them, a stunning majority of them, get most of the answers wrong. Some of these groups even score worse than the general public. Some of the most appalling results came from a group of Nobel laureates and medical researchers. It is not a question of intelligence. Everyone seems to get the world devastatingly wrong. Not only devastatingly wrong, but systematically wrong. By which I mean that these test results are not random. They are worse than random. They are worse than the results I would get if the people answering my questions had no knowledge at all. Imagine I decide to head down to the zoo to test out my questions on the chimpanzees. Imagine I take with the huge armfuls of bananas, each marked either A, B, or C, and throw them into the chimpanzee enclosure. Then I stand outside the enclosure, read out each my question in a loud, clear voice and note down, as each chimpanzee's answer, the letter on the banana she texts chooses to eat. If I did this, and I wouldn't ever actually do this, but just imagine, the chimps, by picking randomly, would do consistently better than the well educated but deluded human beings who take my tests. Through pure luck, the troop of chimps would score 33% on each three answer question, were 4 out of the first 12 on the whole test. Remember that the humans I have tested get an average just 2 out of 12 on the same test. What's more, the chimp's errors would be equally shared between the two wrong answers, whereas the human errors all tend to be in one direction. Every group of people I ask thinks the world is more frightening, more violent, and more hopeless, in short, more dramatic, than it really is. Why don't we beat the chimpanzees? How can so many people be so wrong about so much? How is it even possible that the majority of people score worse than chimpanzees, worse than random? When I got my first little glimpse of this massive ignorance, back in the mid 1990s, I was pleased. I had just started teaching a course in global health at Karolinska Institute in Sweden, and I was a little nervous. These students were incredibly smart. Maybe they would already know everything I had to teach them. What a relief when I discovered that my students knew less about the world than chimpanzees. But the more I tested people, the more ignorance I found, not only among my students but everywhere. I found it frustrating and worrying that people were so wrong about the world. When you use the GPS in your car, it is important that it is using the right information. You wouldn't trust it if it seemed to be navigating you through a different city than the one you were in, because you would know that you would end up in the wrong place. So, how could policymakers and politicians solve global problems if they were operating on the wrong facts? How could business people make sensible decisions for their organizations if their worldview were upside down? And how could each person going about their life know which issues they should be stressed and worried about? I decided to start doing more than just testing knowledge and exposing ignorance. I decided to try to understand why. Why was this ignorance about the world so widespread and so persistent? We were all wrong sometimes, even me, I will readily admit that. But how could so many people be wrong about so much? Why were so many people scoring worse than the chimps? Working late one night at the university, I had a eureka moment. I realized the problem couldn't simply be that people lack the knowledge, because that would give randomly incorrect answers, chimpanzee answers, rather than worse than random, worse than chimpanzee, systematically wrong answers. Only actively wrong knowledge can make us score so badly. I had it. What I was dealing with here, or so I thought, for many years was an upgrade problem. My global health students and all the other people who took my test over the years did have knowledge, but it was outdated, often several decades old. People had a worldview dated to the time when their teachers had left school. So, to eradicate ignorance, or so I concluded, I needed to upgrade people's knowledge. And to do that, I needed to develop better teaching materials, setting out the data more clearly. After I told Anna and Ola about my struggles over a family dinner, both of them got involved and started to develop animated graphs. I traveled the world with these elegant teaching tools. They took me to TED Talks in Monterrey, Berlin, and Cannes, to the boardrooms of multinational corporations like Coca-Cola and IKEA, to global banks and hedge funds, to the US State Departments. I was excited to use our animated charts to show everyone how the world has changed. I had great, I had great fun telling everyone that they were emperors with no clothes, that they knew nothing about the world. We wanted to install the worldview upgrade in everyone. But gradually, we came to realize that there was something more going on. The ignorance we kept on finding was not just an upgrade problem. It couldn't be fixed simply by providing clearer data animations or better teaching tools. Because even people who loved my lectures, I still realized weren't really hearing them. They might indeed be inspired momentarily, but after the lecture, they were still stuck in their old negative worldview. The new ideas just wouldn't take. Even straight after my presentations, I would hear people expressing beliefs about poverty or population growth that I had just proven wrong with the facts. I almost gave up. Why was the dramatic worldview so persistent? Could the media be to blame? Of course, I thought about that, but it wasn't the answer. Sure, the media plays a role, and I discussed that later, but we must not make them into a pantomime villain. We cannot just shout, boo, hiss at the media. I had a defining moment in January 2015 at the World Economic Forum in the small and fashionable Swiss town of the Davos. 1,000 of the world's most powerful and influential political and business leaders, entrepreneurs, researchers, activists, journalists, and even many high ranking UN officers had queued for seats at the forum's main session on socio-economic and sustainable development, featuring me and Bill and Melinda Gates. Scanning the room as I stepped onto the stage, I noticed several heads of the states and a former Secretary General of the UN. I saw heads of UN organizations, leaders of major multinational companies, and journalists I recognized from TV. I was about to ask the audience three fact questions about poverty, population growth, and the vaccination rates, and I was quite nervous. If my audience did know the answers to my questions, then none of the rest of my slides, revealing with a flourish how wrong they were and what they should have answered, would work. I shouldn't have worried. This top international audience, who would spend the next few days explaining the world to each other, did indeed know more than the general public about poverty. A stunning 61% of them got it right. But on the other two questions about future population growth and the availability of basic primary health care, they still did worse than the chimps. Here were people who had access to all the latest data and to advisors who could continuously update them. Their ignorance could not possibly be down to an outdated worldview, yet even they were getting the basic facts about the world wrong. After Davos, things crystallized. Our dramatic instincts and the overdramatic worldview. So here is this book. It shares with you the conclusions I finally reached, based on years of trying to teach a fact-based worldview and listening to how people misinterpret the facts even when they're right there in front of them, about why so many people, from members of the public to very smart, highly educated experts, score worse than chimpanzees on fact questions about the world, and I also tell you what you can do about it. In short, think about the world. War, violence, natural disasters, man-made disasters, corruption. Things are bad and it feels like they're getting worse, right? The rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, and the number of poor just keeps increasing. And we will soon run out of resources unless we do something drastic. At least that's the picture that most Westerners see in the media and carry around in their heads. I call it the overdramatic worldview. It's stressful and misleading. In fact, The vast majority of the world's population lives somewhere in the middle of the income scale. Perhaps they are not what we think of as middle class, but they are living in extreme poverty. Their girls go to school, their children get vaccinated, they live in two-child families, and they want to go to abroad on holiday, not as refugees. Step by step, year by year, the world is improving. Not on every single measure, every single year, but as a rule. Though the world faces huge challenges, we have made tremendous progress. This is the fact-based worldview. It is the overdramatic worldview that draws people to the most dramatic and negative answers to my fact questions. People constantly and intuitively refer to their worldview when thinking, guessing, or learning about the world. So, if your worldview is wrong, then you will systematically make wrong guesses. But this overdramatic worldview is not caused simply by out of date knowledge, but as I once thought. Even people with access to the latest information get the world wrong. And I am convinced it is not the fault of an evil minded media, propaganda, fake news, or wrong facts. My experience over decades of lecturing and testing and listening to the ways people misinterpret the facts, even when they are right in front of them, finally brought me to see that the overdramatic worldview is so difficult to shift because it comes from the very way of our brain works. Optical illusions and global illusions. Look at the two horizontal lines below. Which line is longest? You might have seen this before. The line on the bottom looks longer than the line on the top. You know it isn't, but even if you already know, even if you measure the lines yourself and confirm that they are the same, you keep seeing them as different lengths. My glasses have a custom lens to correct for my personal sight problem. But when I look at this optical illusion, I still misinterpret what I see, just like everyone does. This is because illusions don't happen in our eyes, they happen in our brains. They are systematic misinterpretations unrelated to individual sight problems. Knowing that most people are deluded means you don't need to be embarrassed. Instead, you can be curious. How does the illusion work? Similarly, you can look at the results from the public polls and skip being embarrassed. Instead, be curious. How does this global illusion work? Why do so many people's brains systematically misinterpret the state of the world? The human brain is a product of millions of years of evolution, and we are hardwired with instincts that helped our ancestors to survive in small groups of hunters and gatherers. Our brains often jump to shift conclusions without much thinking, which used to help us to avoid immediate dangers. We are interested in gossip and dramatic stories, which used to be only source of news and useful information. We crave sugar and fats, which used to be life-saving sources of energy when food was scarce. We have many instincts that used to be useful thousands of years ago, but we live in a very different world now. Our cravings for sugar and fats make obesity one of the largest health problems in the world today. We have to teach our children and ourselves to stay away from sweets and chips. In the same way, our quick thinking brains and cravings for drama, our dramatic instincts, are causing misconceptions and an overdramatic worldview. Don't misunderstand me. We will still need these dramatic instincts to give meaning to our world and get us through the day. If we sifted every input and analyzed every decision rationally, a normal life would be impossible. We should not cut our all sugar and fat, and we should not ask a surgeon to remove the parts of our brain that deal with emotions. But we need to learn to control our drama intake. Uncontrolled, our appetite for the dramatic goes too far, prevents us from seeing the world as it is, and leads us terribly astray. Factfulness and the fact-based worldview. This book is my very last battle in my lifelong mission to fight devastating global ignorance. It is my last attempt to make an impact on the world, to change people's way of thinking, calm their irrational fears, and redirect their energies into constructive activities. In my previous battles, I armed myself with huge data sets, eye-opening software, an energetic lecturing style, and a Swedish bayonet. It wasn't enough, but I hope that this book will be. This is data as you have never known it. It is data as therapy. It is understanding as a source of mental peace, because the world is not as dramatic as it seems. Factfulness, like a healthy diet and regular exercise, can and should become part of your daily life. Start to practice it, and you'll be able to replace your over-dramatic worldview with a worldview based on facts. You will be able to get the world right without learning it by heart. You will make better decisions, stay alert to real dangers and possibilities, and avoid being constantly stressed about the wrong things. I'll teach you how to recognize overdramatic stories and give you some thinking tools to control your dramatic instincts. Then you'll be able to shift your misconceptions, develop a fact-based worldview, and beat the chimps every time. So back to the circus. I occasionally swallow swords at the end of my lectures to demonstrate in a practical way that the seemingly impossible is possible. Before my circus act, I will have been testing my audience's factual knowledge about the world. I will have shown them that the world is completely different from what they thought. I will have proven to them that many of the changes they think will never happen have already happened. I will have been struggling to awaken their curiosity about what is possible, which is absolutely different from what they believe and from what they see in the news every day. I swallowed the sword because I want the audience to realize how wrong their intuitions can be. I want them to realize that what I have shown them, both the sword swallowing and the material about the world that came before it, however much it conflicts with the preconceived ideas, however impossible it seems, is true. I want people, when they realize they have been wrong about the world, to feel not embarrassment, but the childlike sense of wonder, inspiration, and curiosity that I remember from the circus, and that I still get every time I discover I have been wrong. Wow, how is that even possible? This is a book about the world and how it really is. It is also a book about you and why you and almost everyone I have ever met do not see the world as it really is. It is about what you can do about it and how this will make you feel more positive, less stressed, and more hopeful as you walk out of the circus tent and back into the world. So, if you're more interested in being right than in continuing to live in your bubble, if you're willing to change your worldview, if you're ready for critical thinking to replace instinctive reaction, and if you're feeling humble, curious, and ready to be amazed, then please read on. 오늘 이렇게 17페이지 읽었고요. 다음은 챕터 1이니까 내일부터 이어가도록 하겠습니다. 오늘은 파랑 단어가 많이 없네요. 이따가 정리해서 올릴게요.